The easy part is finding the investments and getting the income coming in. But the promise I'll give you, because I've been there twice, I'm still financially independent today too, right? Is that no amount of money will ever help you be free. You have to have that abundance mentality with it.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode.
Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. My guest today is Chris Miles, and we're going to be talking about a variety of topics surrounding financial health. Chris is known as the Anti-Financial Adxisor, and you're going to find out why. But first, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. Over there, you can listen to episodes, read synopses, see photos of my guests, read a little bio on myself. There's also a YouTube channel where you can listen. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. As I said, my guest today is Chris Miles. Chris is a leading authority teaching entrepreneurs and professionals how to get their money working for them today in the best way possible. Chris has used his knowledge not once, but twice to become financially independent, where his passive income exceeded his expenses. A lot of freedom in that, folks. And Chris is going to talk about what money is, what money isn't, and how you may be looking at things based on belief systems that are really not working for you. So here he is. Let's get to it. This is Chris Miles. I was talking to my friend Mark, as I told you. He goes, ask him how he got into this. Did he grow up poor? Was his dad in finance? What was his motivation to even go down this path to understanding money and helping people with their financial oeuvre? Let's use the word oeuvre.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when they delivered me as a baby, they actually delivered me on a bunch of $100 bills. So no,
I heard that. A bed of money, born into a bed of money. Okay.
It's born into it, right? Put silver, silver spoon in my mouth, right? No, actually, it was quite the opposite. I mean, I had great parents. They were hardworking people, taught me good values. My mom, she was more the artist side. So she was the starving artist, quote unquote, right? In fact, she was trained by the same master painter as Bob Ross. So, the guy that paints the happy little trees and stuff.
Yeah.
So she was the artist. She taught me to follow my passions. More, my dad taught me to work hard. Your word is your bond, that kind of thing. So very different personalities. But the one thing they had in common is that they were definitely not abundant when it came with money, right? Especially after the divorce. I even lived in a trailer park for a time, but really, like the thing for me is the money attitudes growing up kind of led me down that path. Because, for example, my dad would always say things like, well, we can't afford this. What do you think I am, made of money? Money doesn't grow on trees, and even sometimes he'd say things like, work is going to literally kill me. Like I'm going to die working, because he'd already had heart attacks and strokes by the time he was in his 40s. So obviously, as a kid growing up, that's not the kind of life I wanted, right? I wanted something different. I wanted to control my own destiny, my time, and my freedom. And so when I went to college, I actually was intending to become a business consultant, but I figured if I'm going to do that, I should have real life business experience. So I actually dropped out of college, said, let's just take a 1-year sabbatical, find some sort of business to give me something more than just book smarts. And as I was looking around, the first opportunity that came up a few months later was actually a financial advisor opportunity. And I didn't really know it. I mean, I took like some banking and accounting classes in high school, but nothing significant, right? I even watched Alex P. Keaton, if you remember him on Family Ties. If you ever watched that show in the 80s. Yeah. I did remember thinking like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like I remember the thing where the psychologist dropped change on the floor. He knew exactly how much money he dropped, right? But for me, it was more just an interest of what if I could learn for myself more about money, and of course learn how to run a business, and on top of that, if it even helps my dad get some of his life back, what if it bought him 1 year of his life back? Would that be worth it? So I ended up actually joining. I didn't realize that they would take anybody off the street. I thought you had to have a finance degree or some background. But the truth is, to be a financial advisor, you just have to pass a test with 70% and not have a criminal record, and you're in. That's about as easy as it gets. And I found out years going into it that really I was just a salesman in a suit, right? I was really just someone who was taught to peddle products, but I had a license to do it. I had a license to sell, so to speak, right? And it was interesting. Several years later, my dad actually reached out to me. He said, Chris, when are you going to become my financial advisor? And I said, oh, I never thought you would want my advice. So I sat down with my dad. He said, I'm 61 years old. I want to retire. And for the first time ever, he opened up his books and showed me what was going on with his money. And as I looked at it, I said, Dad, I'm going to be honest with you. Even though you've saved into your 401k, you did everything right there. You've paid off all your debt early. You're completely debt-free, including your home. Here's the deal. You better hope you die in 5 years because that's how long your money will last. Okay, Chris, that's not what I wanted to hear. What do I do? How can I actually retire? And I said, I don't know, because I could put you in this program or this product or that product. But the truth is we're gambling in the stock market. I don't want to risk and have you lose, right? So I really don't know what to do. You did everything right. And it really bugged me. And I was already starting to be bugged by the industry a little bit because I'm one of those people, I like to see the proof. I like to see that it works. And I started to realize, in fact, it was really brought to my attention a few weeks later, because of course, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. I happened to call up my friend Doug, and Doug, he actually was hired by me to be a financial advisor, but then left to go do real estate investing with his dad. So they were partnering on some real estate deals, and I find out that Doug is just tearing it up. He's making tons of money. In fact, his dad has doubled his income as a professor at the local university in just 4 months. And of course, I started calling bull on it. I said, that's too good to be true. There's no way that's possible, right? And he just said, well, Chris, how many of your clients are truly financially free where they don't worry about money? I said, where they don't worry about money? Oh, well, we got retired clients, but they still all worry about running out of money. So I'd say none. Good job, Chris. Way to go. How about this, Chris? This, if anybody's got it figured out, it should be you guys. So of all of you guys as financial advisors, how many of you are financially free, not off the commissions you're earning, but actually doing these investments? And as I really started to objectively look at just mentally image the guys in my office, there's probably over 100 men and women that worked in my office as advisors. And some of them have been working there since the late 1970s, yet none of them could retire. And I said, none. There's your problem, Chris. Okay, well, give me the answer. I won't, because I don't think you're open to it. And I said, no, I am. Like, you got me to see this. Give me something. And that started me down a path of really starting to look at another perspective. And this is kind of when I went from being a financial advisor to quitting that industry, because I had to keep my integrity intact. I had an integrity crisis. Either I keep selling it and just put blinders on and just do like some of my friends are doing, good-hearted people, but it's their career. They feel like they got to keep selling it. Or do I trash my career after 4 years of being in that industry and do something else? And I chose the latter, because I can't sell something I can't believe in, right?
How old were you at this point in your life?
I was 28 years old.
Okay, well, that's great. Nice young guy, ready to make a big change. I like that.
Yep.
Okay.
And so I did. I was a mortgage broker for that period of time. Of course, in 2006, anybody could be a mortgage broker because it was easy to do mortgages back then. I was doing that. I was even doing some things on the side, but I was starting to learn some of the things that my friend was talking to me about, passive income and cash flow and things like that. And eventually got to work in my own life, where later that year, when I was almost 28 still at that point, I was able to retire. I was actually work optional at that point. I had enough passive income coming in to pay for my expenses. And that was a shocker, because as a financial advisor, I was hoping and working so hard, trying to be dirt cheap, so that almost like my dad was, right? I was trying to do this. I was following the same path as him, trying to be dirt cheap to then have that financial freedom. And that was the big epiphany to me too, is that I was on the same track as my dad, even though I wanted to do it differently, but I was still trying to be cheap. I was trying to save. I was in that scarcity mode, trying to create all this money. But in truth, that's because they tell you to accumulate all this money and then live on 3% a year. So if I accumulate $2 million, I can finally live on that $5,000 a month income that I wanted, which at that time seemed like a dream. Nowadays, after inflation, sounds like you're almost broke, right? So that's where I really knew that things had to change. And when I was able to do it so quickly by focusing on income versus just accumulation, right? It's more movement of money and flow of money versus just letting it sit there stagnant and rotting, almost like this Great Salt Lake here, which is nasty. You don't want to swim in it. So you don't want to have that kind of that aspect. You want to have movement of your money and flow.
When I hear passive income and cash flow, I think mostly that it's real estate, because that's basically the thing that is talked about. It's you buy a place and somebody else is paying your rent and your mortgage for you, and then you have some extra money, so you have this cash flow, and then you flip that and you get something bigger, and then so there's more cash flow. Now that's really great stuff when it works. Of course, it's fantastic. I think it's gotten harder to do, and I may be wrong about that. That may just be a crappy attitude on my part. But is that how you did it, through real estate, or are there other ways? Because I find it pretty fascinating to think about the idea, and I want to talk about freedom in a second. But how did you do it, through real estate?
Yes, and more. Yeah, to your point, I did through real estate, but I also had other streams of income outside of real estate too. So here's how I did it, not just the first time, but also the second time as well. Just so you know, the recession kicked my butt. I went over $1 million in debt, had to dig out of that hole with no money and no credit. Just to prove that it works again, right?
Sure.
So I definitely don't believe that there are any accidents in life. I believe that there's always a purpose, that things happen for you, not to you, right? But I'll tell you, it's interesting because yes, real estate's great. And so when I talk about passive income, I separate my incomes a little bit. So passive income, I look as investment income. And so that could even be, it could technically be owning a stock. You could own like a big company, like a Walmart type of stock, even though it's not the best, right, example, but Walmart, there's General Motors. I mean, there's all kinds of stocks out there that you can buy the stock and get paid quarterly a dividend. Now, they don't pay great, but you can do those kind of stocks, right? And that would be, I would consider that passive income, because it's using investment money to then go and pay you back without you having to put the effort into it. I also look at residual income too. And residual income I see as money that you can make through business streams that might seem like it's more passive, right? So in business, for example, like if you've got memberships somehow involved, like Netflix has a great model because they have that subscription model. Now they still deliver on it, but in a lot of ways, whether people use it or not, it's money coming in. It's like a gym membership. If somebody owns a gym, somebody has a membership, they don't show up, you still make the money, right? And you still make the membership there. That's, in a way, I call that more like residual income, even if there's some aspects of management involved. It could be intellectual property. Maybe you have ideas or concepts. Maybe you wrote a book. Maybe you produced DVDs or maybe not DVDs anymore, streaming, downloadable type of media or content that can then be sold. You produce it one time, but then it pays you over and over and over again, right? I call that residual income. So I did it both ways. I did it through real estate. So I took the money I had, invested in real estate, and then that paid me income. I also, and this was almost by accident. This was during the time I was a mortgage broker. I remember one of my friends, he was a millionaire. He asked me, he said, "Chris, do you really like doing mortgages?" And if he was even asking me, he's like, if money were no issue in your life, what would you spend your time doing? And at the time I said, I might teach ballroom dancing. Like I might do that. I was still doing that on the side for free, occasionally paid under the table. But I was like, I might do that. It's like, okay, great. But do you like doing mortgages? I said, well, I like getting people the results. And I like teaching them about strategies to use their mortgage for, but I'm not a fan of paperwork. I hate paperwork, despise it. It's the one thing that just makes my day horrible. So I actually told him, I said, no, I don't like that. He said, well, Chris, why don't you find somebody who does like doing that? I said, are there people that actually like doing those things? And he said, yeah, there are. There's a lot of nerds out there that like doing it. And so I found a guy named Clark in my office. I asked around who would be willing to do that. And I asked Clark, would you pay me 50% if I gave you people? They're already ready to go. You just have to do the paperwork. And Clark said, yeah, of course. I don't have to find people. I don't have to talk to people hardly. This is great. So he did. Next thing you know, I'm getting paid 50% kickbacks on mortgages that I hardly spend any time doing. Maybe spend a half hour or so educating the client. And then they turn around, they go and and I'm getting a check for $1,000 or $2,000 after it's done. And I started doing things like that. I realized I could actually, I could be a connector instead, right? I can actually refer people and get them connected to be able to do these kind of deals. Even a wholesale jeweler in Salt Lake City. I found, there was somebody I bought my engagement and wedding rings from, and I did that and made money from that, and so I would get 5% kickback. And so I actually was spending really only a couple hours a week working, but I was making more money than I made as a financial advisor, ironically enough.
So what you're really saying is being somebody that connects people to each other is of great value. If you can do that, then you're providing a service, but not doing the actual, grunt work, is for lack of a better term. But there are people that do love that. When I was thinking about the last time I refinanced, or the second to last time, the guy, I had used the guy once, and his company had grown, and I never saw him again on that last refi that I did with him. He had some other guy doing it all. I called him. He goes, "Yeah, I'm going to hook you up with so-and-so." And that's the only guy I talked to. And talk about paperwork. It was mounds. It was right after the all the stuff went south. So there was so much suspicion and paperwork on the parts of the banks that I literally filled out the paperwork. By the time it got processed, I had to do it again because 2 months had lapsed. And it's like, we got to see if you still have that money. I just gave you this. I know we were a little slow. You got to do it again. I'm like, okay, well, here's more statements. It was so on the part of me, and I'm not even the guy doing the paperwork. I was like, this is grueling. I love that idea of being somebody that connects other people. That's kind of what I'm doing with this. Is I try to connect my audience to people that have value, and my value is that I find them and I hopefully bring out that part that is of value to other people.
Yeah. You really hit the nail on the head there. Like, really, I didn't realize this at the time because I didn't understand the difference between scarcity and abundance. A great book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, has a section about that. And there's other books too, of course. But that was the first one I started reading when I heard that concept. And even the guys I was talking to that were millionaires were all talking about this abundance mentality versus scarcity. And as a financial advisor, I didn't realize everything we did and we were taught was out of scarcity, everything. And so even when I did business, it was out of scarcity. I never thought I could share business with people. So I was the do-it-yourselfer, right? I of course, sold mutual funds. I sold life insurance and things like that. I even tried to sell health insurance, even though I wasn't very good at it. I even tried to offer things like debt pay downs type of services. And I even tried to do my own mortgages and everything else. And at the end of the day, when I got that more abundant mentality, and what you just said, the key principle that these guys taught me was dollars follow value, right? Dollars follow value that you create for other people. How do you create that win-win? How do you give them what they want? And all of a sudden, money became easy for me. It became formulaic, right? It became predictable. Because before, it was always, I had a scarcity mentality about money where I used to think, oh, well, I have to either get lucky, be in the right place at the right time, or have to somehow be this zero-sum game where there's a win-lose transaction, right? And I remember even as a financial advisor, I would tell people, hey, I'll cut back my commissions as much as I can so that you can win. And the funny thing is, especially in the mortgage game, that doesn't work. In fact, when I started referring to this other guy, he said, hey, well, we just charge standard 1%, just like everybody else on the origination fee. And I said, okay, great. I was trying to tell people to charge a half and they would still shop me. Well, when they went to this guy for standard 1%, they didn't shop me. It was ironic that even though people were charged more than industry standard, because I wasn't trying to be the cheapest guy on the block, a commodity, it was funny how those people actually valued it more. And so I actually did better business referring to Clark by letting them charge normal than I was trying to do the other thing. And I was still, of course, creating value, and I was doing that before. But the thing is that, again, I was always thinking it was a zero-sum game. I had to lose. If I were being a benevolent person, I would have to lose for others to win. Or if I want to be a jerk and make a lot of money, I just have to make other people lose. And that's not the truth. I mean, you can create a world like that, but it's not the real world. It's not the world the way it has to be in an abundant mentality.
That word scarcity comes up a lot when people talk about money, and really underneath that, the real word is fear. And the biggest fear, and I'll take it all the way to the end, I'm going to die broken alone. There you go. I'm going to be broken alone if I'm not whatever, careful. It's like musical chairs. The music stops. I better get a chair,
or I'm screwed. And so you move through life with this attitude where you're kind of on this hyper alert, firing cortisol day and night, looking over your shoulder to make sure you're okay. It's a shitty way to live, for one,
Yeah.
but it is pervasive. I have sort of I want to talk about a similar thing, because I do have scarcity. I grew up with parents who grew up in the Depression, and there was actual scarcity at the time, serious scarcity. People were jumping off of buildings, which is the ridiculous idea over money. Doesn't seem smart to me, but I understand it, because their self-worth and their terror of the future was so great that I lost my money, I'm going to jump off a building. That's the severest thing you can do. Mm-hmm. But this idea of, I still think it's important to have financial clarity. I think that is probably a better word than fear, because, and I do like to live below my means. I don't feel deprived. When we look at these things like, looking outside of ourselves, oh, this person has this, and this, and I don't, they must be happier than me. That's, I think, where people get into a lot of trouble in terms of what do when I ask myself, how do I want to spend my time? And where do I really want to spend my money? What is the half-life joy of anything that I buy? I got this shirt. What's the half-life on this? The big buzz comes, the first day I put it on. I got a new shirt. I look pretty good in this thing, And then, by the third time, it's probably not bringing me much happiness. I mean, I'm glad I have the shirt, because I don't want to go with no shirt on. But do I go buy a second, third, fourth shirt every time I feel like I need that sort of that rush? So I've always lived way below my means, but not. Some of it's out of scarcity and fear, and some of it is I don't really want that stuff. There is after a certain level of comfort and needs being met, like food and shelter and certain, car, all these basic things. After that, how much do I really, am I confusing wants and needs? And I think when we ask ourselves those questions, it can, without regard to what other people are doing or thinking or saying, just for you, for me, what is that? What does that look like? Because I may not have the same, to me, it's freedom. That's the freedom to me. Financial freedom isn't a ton of money necessarily, although, it's great to have money. I mean, it's great. You can do a lot of good stuff with it. But the freedom to me is the less that I crave and feel deprived of and feel okay about myself, the freer I am, the less encumbered, the less things I have to insure, the less things I have to think about breaking, the less things I have to think about. Man, that's kind of my attitude. And I don't know if I'm, if I'm kidding myself or that's not, that feels right to me. You know what I'm talking about? Because there's everything sort of has these flipping kind of two sides to them. There's the building, certain assets, and then there's the not needing certain things because you're okay, and understanding what that is and what that balance is.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
I couldn't stop. I'm sorry. I saw you. I saw you going, what's he saying? Okay. I knew you knew what I was talking about, but I think about this a lot because I've talked about it quite a bit with, friends. It's like, I meet people that are in, consumer debt and different things, and they're chasing something that isn't even there.
Yeah. I'll say this is no amount of money will ever make you financially free, right? At least not how I define financial freedom. Financial freedom I define as when money is no longer the primary reason or excuse that you do or do not do anything. It could be a secondary, but it's not the primary reason that drives your life, right? It doesn't own you. You own it. You're the steward. You're the controller, the master of your money. And it's a hard concept for a lot of people because it is on the more of the emotional side and it is the intellectual side. Because on the intellectual side, that's the part that people hire me for, right? Like that's what they hire our company to help them one-on-one, like match them up with investments and help them strategize, figure out how they can get, enough passive income coming in that they're work optional. They work because they want to, not because they have to. And so I tell them all the time. In fact, I just told them this a few weeks ago on our monthly call. I said, listen, the easy part is the strategy. The easy part is finding the investments and getting the income coming in. But the promise I'll give you, because I've been there twice, I'm still financially independent today too, right? Is that no amount of money will ever help you be free. You have to have that abundance mentality with it. And so what you're describing actually is what I want people to do, is that, you're doing it because like you said, it brings you happiness. It brings you joy. Kind of like Marie Kondo says, right? Where she's talked about, does it bring you joy? That can be deceiving because some people are trying to fill, like we said before we went on the air, filling an empty void, right? They're trying to fill it with stuff or experiences. And it's not that you can't have experiences. It's not that you can't do those things. But what it really is that you want to be in a place where it just doesn't matter. And I'll tell you, I hit a higher level of financial freedom when I went broke. So after I became financially independent the first time, I remember thinking, was I just lucky? Was it just the markets? But then when the recession hit, then I realized, oh, there was a little bit of luck there, right? You mentioned earlier, like real estate, you're like, it seems harder now than it was before. Well, it's true. Because in say like 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, going into the first half of 22, you could be an idiot and make money in real estate investing, right? You didn't need any real expertise. But that happened to me in 2006, going to 2007. And of course, that's when I started to see things turning, was in 2007. And but when I lost everything, that's when I realized I had everything, if that makes sense. Because when I got to the point where, I remember my house was foreclosed on. I did go bankrupt, but it would have been easier if I did, because at least hitting the reset button to go back to zero of debt would have been great compared to negative 1 million, right? Or about 1.1 million to be exact. And so I remember, losing the house. So, had to sell that back. They got rid of some of the debt. I sold off about every material possession I had other than like our family vehicle and things like that. And it was when I was left with nothing, I was really forced to look at me, because my ego, right? My lack of confidence in myself. The thing is that I would put the stuff out in front and say, hey, people, look at me, look at my value, right? And so I remember I bought the nice house. I bought the nice Mercedes and stuff, which I eventually had to turn back in. I turned it in voluntarily. I was like, you're going to take it from me anyways, because I can't make the payments. So here you go, right? I was putting that stuff out in front to say, look at my value. When that was all stripped away, it was a very vulnerable place where I had to look and say, well, where is the real value? And I knew when I got to, even before I got to that place, but even as I was there in that moment, I knew I was the value, because those things don't matter. I can always get things back. The real value comes from within. Is that what can I create as a value creator in people's lives? How can I serve people, solve problems, or add value in such a way that money is just a natural byproduct anyways? And I focus on me as a value creator and how I can go about serving people with my talents and gifts and experiences and everything else. That is when everything was eventually turning around. When I got to that place of submission and that place of acceptance, that's when everything got better. I became more financially free in that moment, because then, like what you just said, it wasn't about having all the stuff. Once you meet a certain amount of money to at least meet your obligations and bills, help raise your family or take care of yourself or whatever it might be, you really don't need more money. All money becomes is just a stewardship. Now, I'm not saying reject it, because you as a steward have that choice. But it's not the money that changes you. Money is just a magnifier of the soul. It makes you more of who you already are, right? So as I got more money, I was faced with a choice. I said, now I got more money coming in. I can either just live fat and happy, so to speak, right? I can live comfortably, or I can do something different. And I believe that we're all sent to this planet for a reason. I believe we all have something to contribute that can make this world a better place than when we came into it. And so even right now, like I'm reinvesting my own money back into my business Money Ripples to create that ripple effect, right? So that can help educate and do what I'm doing right now, help people out. I love teaching anyways. It's a passion. So it lights me up, right? That's why I like doing these interviews. That's why I do my own podcast show. But it's It's more than that. It's more its ability for me to be able to express and have my purpose be amplified with the money that I have. And that to me is the real purpose of money, is using it as something, as a tool, not something that owns you.
Yes, that's where the freedom is. If it doesn't own you and you're using it as another asset, just like, breathing air, drinking water is just one of those things that is a necessity. But how much are you going to let this thing can run your mind and your day-to-day living, or are you going to just have it in the proper place where it's working, but you're not feeling desperate, And now I don't know if this is a scarcity mentality, but when I think about buying something, I ask myself some questions. The first thing is, do I need it, or do I just want it because it would be cool to have? And they're both valid reasons to get things. Do I need it right now? Is the price, a reasonable price for this thing? Is this going to take away from maybe something else that's more important to me? So I ask myself those questions. I've always done that. I don't know why, where I learned it. Maybe I learned it from my folks. And then I realized as I got older, a lot of people don't do that. They just don't even ask those questions. And I was with a friend of mine. He was, and this is very minor, but we were in a car wash, and he sees these new car mats hanging on a rack. And he says to me, I'm going to get these. These are cool. And I said to him, do you really need these things? I mean, I saw there were car mats in your car. They didn't look like messed up or anything. I go, do you really? He goes, well, they're cool. I go, well, do you really need them? And he looks at me and he goes, you know what? Thank you. I don't need them. I don't even really want them. I just saw them and I got excited. And I was like, wow. Because to me, it was like a what would you call it? Just frivolous spending to spend to get a hit, a dopamine hit. Now, am I any genius? No, it's just who I am. But but it was something that changed in that moment. He was only 24 at the time, so that was young to me. I was 10 years older than him, so I had experienced a lot of that.
That's a key thing, is that consumers focus on price while creators focus on value. And they're very different, right? And when I say creators, I even mean like this being a wise steward. I think it's a great question to ask. Like, do I really need it? Because the truth is, for the most part, you don't need anything. I mean, really, almost everything's a want. I mean, even if you say, well, I need food, well, you do in order to live, but do you need it? No. And do you probably even need that food? No. You could probably just live on potatoes. You probably wouldn't live a great quality of life, right? That's why if you want something greater, you could live on something else, or you would want something else. I think for the most part, trying to get rid of, unless you have the in order to, right? Getting rid of the word need is important, right? Almost everything comes down to, what do you really want in life, and how do you want your life to look like? And it's about value and about quality of life versus just quantity of stuff, right? And I think that's the big difference. Remember, people in scarcity will always focus on the price. How can I get this cheap? And the problem is that often you get what you pay for too.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
Now, granted, all things being equal, and I'm the kind of guy, I'll still look at price. But remember, I said that financial freedom is when money is not the primary reason or excuse that you do not do or do not do anything. So value's first, but then price second. So if the value is the same, of course, I want to go for the cheaper price, right? There's two, things given me. I'm going to go for the cheaper price. Now, if I do see a cheaper price, I'm going to question the value. I'm like, well, is that really good? Why are they selling it for less? Is there something I'm not getting? Like, it's good to question that. Yeah. But yes, I'm going to go for the lesser price anyways. Like, I'm the kind of guy that, here's a good example. I went into scarcity myself, and you never get rid of scarcity, but I'm a marathoner, and I was watching on YouTube the live stream of the Tokyo Marathon, which is one of the marathons I want to do. It's one of the 6 major world majors. And I was trying to watch the Tokyo Marathon. And I remember, like, there's a block right there. So you can kind of see the runners around this block that's in the middle of it, but you can't exactly see it. You can just hear it. You can hear the commentators, but you're not really watching the race, because they put a big block saying, if you want to see it, pay $1. And my wife was dumbfounded. She's like, why are you debating over $1? I was like, well, I'm trying to determine that if it's really worth it or not to me, because the only reason you pay $1 is because you think you're getting more than $1's value, right? The only reason that somebody's selling it to you for $1 is because they think that the dollar is worth more to them than whatever they're giving you, right? So therefore, the one thing it's not worth is $1. That's a whole nother conversation. But I was like, is it really worth $1 to me? And actually, it wasn't even the dollar. The thing, because the dollar didn't matter to me, was the fact of having to go find my card, having to put in the information online, possible risk that that my information might be stolen, right? So I started thinking about it. I was like, I don't care that much, and so I didn't pay the $1. It didn't mean I couldn't afford it. It was just, was it worth it to me? And I think that's a better, more powerful question to ask when you're in that moment.
Yeah, I would also ask this question. I would say this. I don't like the fact that they're trying to get me, even if it's for only $1. They're trying to take advantage of the fact that I want this thing.
That's right.
And I thought it was going to be free. And now it's $1. That's just not right. I mean, how, and then I start going, well, what if, 500,000 people are paying $1 because it's not that much, and those assholes are making $500,000. I'm not participating.
Forget the fact that they probably hired camera crews and everybody else to help deliver it to you live streaming, so you can watch it without having to actually go to Tokyo, right? Yeah, right. I'm like sitting on my bed watching.
Like they have no expenses
night,
whatsoever. They're just total selfish, greedy people, and I'm not giving them $1.
Well, that's the truth. There's so many people that believe that, and that's a scarcity world we live in, right? Like that comes back to what I used to think before, is that many people believe that you can only become prosperous through luck or exploitation, right? Yes. So either I win the lottery or somebody's got to be somehow ripping me off, And when you can say that about Bill Gates, you can say that about Steve Jobs. Well, Steve Jobs is dead, right? But you can say that about guys like Jeff Bezos. Oh, they're just ripping me off Amazon Prime. Well, the truth is, if you're still paying it, you still value what they're offering more than the money that's just sitting in your pocket as pieces of paper, right? Or dollars and cents on a bank account. So obviously they're delivering some sort of value. If people looked at it like billionaires weren't just screwing people over, and I'm not saying you think this all the time, because I can tell already you don't think this way, but if people didn't believe that they're just trying to screw people over, you'll realize that they're actually delivering value, and that's how they got rich in the first place, right? That's how everybody can get rich, no matter who you are. It's how you deliver more value. Even on a smaller level, I've had clients where they work W-2 jobs, because people say, well, as a business owner, I can see that. But what if I work a W-2 job? Somebody else is determining my wage. And my answer is, no, they're not. You're determining your wage, because the reason they pay you that wage is because they believe you are worth more. Even if it's just a penny more an hour or per year, they believe you're worth more than what they're paying you, or they never pay you. From a business owner perspective, I know that to be true. But here's the other thing that's also true. If you're willing to accept that paycheck, if you're not just throwing it back in their face or saying no, you believe that your time is worth less whenever money they're paying you. So if you're being paid, say $25 an hour, you believe your time is worth less than $25 an hour. No matter how you try to argue it, your actions justify it differently, right? That's why I say, like, even $25 an hour, that's the one thing you're not worth, because they think you're worth more than $25 an hour, which is why they're willing to pay it. You think you're worth less, and that's the middle ground. So the big thing is, how do I deliver more value to where they have to give me a raise because they know they're going to lose somebody awesome? That's the real key. Is if you have that kind of mindset of, in fact, I've had many clients do this. Just go to your employer, or whoever it is, your manager, whoever, and just ask them, what can I do that would merit me a raise? What can I do to add value to this company that I would deserve or earn a raise? Notice I use those key words there. I'm earning, I'm deserving, not I am entitled to it, which is the exact, right. That's a scarcity emotion too. But no, how do I get to the point where you want to give me a raise? And I've had people do that. And then when they tell them, this is what you need to do, hold them to it. And they'll do it. And even if they happen to go back on the word, let's just say they don't have integrity, I've always found that karma works in your favor. It's like, I call it karmic debt, right? I was trying to create so much karmic debt when I was broke. I was like, I know that the universe has to pay me back at some point. And I was doing, and that's the same thing in the job, because even if you let's just say you do get taken advantage of by the employer, they just do not value you, they're not giving you that raise, someone else will take you. Their opportunity will show up where something better will come along. It always pays out. You just have to have the faith and that abundance mindset, which is tied in with that faith, to believe that that's always going to be the case, and you move that direction and things will work out in your favor.
Well, there is that idea that in any negotiation, that the party of least interest has the upper hand. So if you're willing to walk, that's the freedom. Now, sometimes you do have to walk. And that's the scary part am I going to be able to replace this and maybe even do better. But if you don't do it, you're never going to know. It's hard
That's
though
right.
when you have people you're supporting. It's this stuff is so much more available when you're a single guy. I mean, it's just great to go. Hey, I'm not doing you. You're not you're out of integrity, and you're not really willing to take a look, and it, but you're just trying to push it as far as you can because they're scared too. I was thinking about something I read when I was in my 20s that was very valuable to me. It was a Buddhist thing that I was reading, and there were two things in there that really hit me. One was the phrase, be content with little. Now, it doesn't mean settle for less. It means be okay no matter what. Don't think that this other stuff is going to fix it. So if you're a content person, that is a certain level of freedom that gives you the ability to move in new directions. That was one thing. And the other one is something you just talked about is this is the Buddhist version of what you were talking about. We were talking about need and want. Is all suffering begins with wanting. It doesn't mean you can't want stuff. It's just know that you may, if you want it too bad and you're not getting it, you may suffer.
It just really comes down to gratitude, doesn't it? If you look at either of those, contentment, like you said, doesn't mean you're settling, but being grateful for what you have, that whatever you're grateful for, whatever you appreciates, right? If you're grateful for something, you tend to get more of it. I've noticed in my own life, even when you tend to look at your blessings as a burden, that's exactly when you lose those blessings. That's when you lose whatever those things that you might be grateful for after you lost it. I've seen that even in business. Like if all of a sudden I feel like I have too much business going on for the systems or whatever it might be, then it's like, oh, there's just so much business coming in. I hate it. And like you already see my body language, right? I'm already telling, everything energetically, stop the flow, which you shouldn't do instead of allowing that flow to come in. But of course, whenever you see that as a burden, you see too much money coming in. If it's a burden, you feel like, oh, I have too much money to manage. I can't manage it all. Your stewardship will shrink till you're comfortable again. Like it always happens that way every time. That's why gamblers never tend to hold on to money either, because they believe in luck, right? They believe that they have to get lucky. They believe taking high risks create high returns, which is not true. Having a higher chance of losing does not make a higher chance of winning, right? So again, when they try to do that, they try to think, okay, well, hopefully it'll work out, but they're not really truly grateful for what they have. They're always just wanting. They want the shortcut, but they never follow the actual principles and strategies that actually allow them to not just get it, but keep it, right? So there's got to be that 1-2 punch. There's got to be the principle you follow, but the strategies and the actions have to follow it up too.
Yeah, and you're talking about the spiritual underpinning of all living. And I think there's a lot of times it's a separate thing. It's like, I'll pray, I'll meditate, I'll do some volunteer work. But my money thing is a completely separate thing because that's money. And it isn't. It just isn't. It's difficult when other people are looking at it that way and you have to deal with them. But that's really the challenge to me is people that don't think the way I think in whatever area it is and don't have the same value. And I'm still touched by that your father taught you that your word is your bond, that kind of thing, what you said in the beginning. That to me is something like that is an incredible gift that he gave you.
I agree.
To impart that, because that is something very lacking in overall. I don't know if it's become more that way or less that way. I don't really know. I've always felt that way too. And also, paying your debts and paying your, it's your financial word. Your credit score basically is your financial word.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of thing. I mean, I actually enjoy having a high credit score. I like that.
Yeah.
It tells me that I'm, you can count on me.
It's integrity. It's the integrity of credit, right? Integrity of using your debt. I think it's a great thing. Despite what Dave Ramsey will say, who teaches completely out of scarcity, right?
Yeah. I was once I was buying a car many years ago, and I was going to finance it at the dealership. And I was talking to the finance woman, and her husband was like the head of finance or something. So that I'm in the room with the two of them, this couple, and the guy looks at my credit score and he starts giving me shit for the credit score being high, like jealous, almost. Yeah. And I was like, what's going on, man? He's like, well, yeah, I mean, you got like I don't know, forget what it was. Let's say it was 720 or something. I don't know. Because 720, that's like the highest score I've seen in here. And what's going on? How you doing that? He was such a, I'll just use the word, he was a dick. I just, I didn't do business with him. I didn't do it. It was such a turnoff to me. And I'm thinking, why would he say that? I mean, because he could get a higher rate if my score was lower. I get that. But but it wasn't even that. It was almost like I screwed up and I hate you for not doing that. It was so weird. I'm like, this guy's insane. So I literally, it cost him, his crappy attitude cost him business, because I did not want to sign anything with that dealership. I wouldn't do it.
That's something I haven't shared on many podcasts, but that's a valuable point from a couple of different dimensions. I mean, one, just the fact he had that response, but two, it tells you what kind of perspective somebody has. Now, I don't expect everybody to have the perfect, abundant perspective every time, but when you see that if scarcity is the go-to, especially when it comes to doing business with somebody, run, right? Because they're showing you their colors. Like that's why I like to listen to people and hear what they're talking about, even if it's not about the situation, right? Or about money. Sometimes just hearing how they respond to things makes a big difference. For example, people say, well, how do I find a good CPA? I said, well, talk to them, ask them about their own personal beliefs about, taxes and money and things like that. For example, ask them, hey, what do you think about IRAs and 401ks? Now, if an accountant says, oh, you should do it, then I already know they're not an accountant for me, because accountants know that there's no tax advantages to IRAs or 401ks. You're just kicking the tax can down the road. But if they're in scarcity, they know that they're trying to justify their job by quote unquote saving you money, right? So if you put that money in the IRA because you deferred your income to a later date, they'll say, oh, you saved on taxes. But in truth, that's not the case. If they say, well, it could be good, it's situational, but here's some warnings too. If they're a little bit more diplomatic about it, great, I'm okay with that. If I ever see somebody who's an investor and they say, well, high risk creates high return, or it takes money to make money. Whenever somebody says that to me, I kind of get a more of a scary feeling from them, because I know that they're violating principles in their investment, and that could backfire and hurt me as an investor in their investment. So those kind of key things, like listening to people's language, what kind of things come up of abundance versus scarcity, and do they follow true principles, true financial principles, or do they go more on financial strategies or things that they've heard, but really violate those same principles?
It really is about the person. And like you were saying earlier about just connecting with somebody, does this feel like they actually care about helping, or they just, is this their job that they do, and they don't, they're not maybe dishonest or anything, but they don't really care, or they might not even know. Even know, Now the idea of an IRA, now that you brought that up, isn't the idea that you kick the tax down the road and you're paying lower taxes because you're in retirement? Isn't that the idea? Isn't that the idea of an IRA? You put it away, it accrues, you're not spending it, and then instead of paying the tax on what today's a working amount of money would be, let's say you're in the 30% tax bracket, but down the road you're retired and now you're in the 22%.
Let's go with that, right? Because
let's go with that. Because I'm curious, because I have an IRA, so I want to know. And you can charge me for this.
No, absolutely. No, you get this for free. Well, think of it. I mean, they that's what they sell you, right? They sell you that, hey, down the road, it'll be less expensive. And I remember when I worked at corporate America before I became a financial advisor, and about the time I was starting to train to become one, I remember that they offer the 401k at work. And of course, this woman that was probably like no older than like 32 years old at the time. I mean, she was older than me, but still very young. And she said, yeah, this 401k, it makes sense because, really when you get old, you really don't need any money. You really don't need more money. It's more expensive when you have family. So you just save it down the road because you won't pay as much in taxes because you won't need to spend as much money when you're older. And that sounds like a 30-year-old, right? Yeah. But the reality
There's
is
no
as you've
inflation,
gotten
by the
older,
way, in that scenario.
I've never known anybody. I mean, Bob, I'm sure you could test this too. Like life doesn't necessarily get cheaper, right, down the road. I mean, inflation alone makes life more expensive. Even if you don't raise your standard of living, your standard of living has to go up just because of inflation. So even if let's just assume they keep tax rates the exact same. They don't raise them at all, which we're in one of the lowest tax brackets we've ever been in the low 100 plus years since 1914. But say that it's, it doesn't go up. Well, if it's still the same, just because you have to spend more money to live would put you in a higher tax bracket. Not to mention, of course, when you have family, for example, or you have maybe mortgage interest and things like that, you're writing off for your taxes, you have all those write-offs then. It's almost like it's intentional that the government wants you to get to the point where they tell you, pay off your house by the time you retire, so you have no mortgage interest anymore, and get rid of your kids, empty nest, and then pull out the money, which means you have no tax advantages at all, no tax breaks, and therefore you're pulling out the money, most likely because you're having to spend more anyways in a higher tax bracket. And not to mention, of course, they make it all muddy because, hey, if you pull out Social Security while you pull out your IRA, do you get taxed on Social Security or not? And all that kind of junk, right? They just really, anytime I've seen it, the reality of the situation for people in retirement, they're like, wait, I'm still paying a lot of tax. And now I have to pull out more money so I can actually live, which of course you pull out more, just puts it in a higher tax bracket, right? So that's the conundrum that you kind of run into with IRAs and 401ks. It's really, when people say there's a tax advantage, I just say that's a farce, right? Do you kick the can down the road? Yes, that's true. But from, I would say 95% plus of situations, people aren't going to be in a lesser tax bracket when they're older. The only reason they'd be in a lesser tax bracket is because the plan failed. And that is truth, because the average 401k balance for a 65-year-old is $80,000 right now. Even right now, Fidelity, who has 48 million clients in Fidelity, they have 401k accounts with Fidelity. Out of the 48 million, at the end of 2022, only 299,000 had $1 million plus in there. And remember, financial advisors say you should be only pulling out 3% a year. The up-to-date financial advisors, not the one from 20 years ago that haven't updated their information. They used to say 4% rule. It's 3% now. It's been that way for years. So 3%, you pull out $1 million, is 30,000 a year. You're living below the poverty line as a millionaire. You're a broke millionaire, right?
Yeah.
So think of that. I mean, only 299,000. That's less than 1% of people with 401ks have over $1 million in their 401ks. If this were such a great thing, you'd think it would have worked by now, but it hasn't. This is why I left financial advising almost 20 years ago, for this very reason, is it overpromise and drastically underdeliver.
Yeah. The allure of the 401k also is that you're matched by the employer. But if you're not somebody that even isn't good at putting money into the 401k, it doesn't matter if you're not but $80,000. I mean, you can blow through that in at best 2 years. You'll be through it. Yeah, you probably one for most people, or 6 months even. But that isn't very much money. It's just not anymore.
No, that match is nothing. I mean, when you look at the longer interest rate, like the compounding interest rate of the match, even if you get 100% match, it usually only adds about 2 to 3% long term. Because in the end, let's just say that you only do dollar for dollar match. You don't put anything more than that, which means you won't make retirement anyways, because you can't save enough to get just that match, and then that's it. But let's just say you happen to do that. The problem is that your end number result will only be just exactly double in 30 or 40 years. Well, that rule of 72, talking about how many years it takes to double your money and that kind of thing, you start to do the math, that's why it's only about a 2% difference. But taking Fidelity as an example again, most people, in fact, about 85% of millennials and Zoomers that are putting money into their retirement accounts are selecting, in Fidelity, they're selecting the retirement target date funds, right? So if your retirement date is 2055, they go throw their money in there. It's like, oh, this is easy. Look, I just put my money in this target date fund and they do all the decisions for me. I don't have to decide where to put my money. So they throw it in there, right? Well, those target date funds, I just looked at the performance. In the last 10 years, it underperformed the market by 2%. 2%. The stock market, by the way, has only averaged 7.7% in the last 30 years. So 2% less would put you at 5.7%. So even if you get the 2% extra long-term compounded return from the match, you just got back up to what the stock market is. Oh, but wait, there's more. You also have a 0.75% cost on that money, because that fund will charge you 0.75%, meaning you're probably lucky to have about a 7% return with the match. You start factoring that in with a higher inflation rate than what the government tells you, which we know is more than 2 or 3%, right? Even in the down year, the lower years, still we know that usually the inflation is about 5 to 7% higher than whatever they report. So even if you put it at 5% inflation rate, you'll find out whatever you save in a 401k with the match, that is what you'll live on after inflation. So if you max fund your 401k at $20,000 a year, you'll be living on a $20,000 a year lifestyle in retirement. It's broken. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. And so your take on it is take the money that you're earning and that you're saving and put it into something that's going to make you money on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
And exactly. That would be, there's several ways to do that. When I think about real estate, particularly in Los Angeles, where I live, it is so prohibitive to even get in. You almost can't do it. I mean, luckily it's you can invest anywhere in the country, you can do that. It's not as easy because you can't, you have to, if you want to go and look at the property or whatever it is, you have to go, do that. And it isn't as passive as I think as people try to sell it on their, podcasts and their, they get rich, real estate. Yeah. I see, I've watched a bunch of these people and I'm like, boy, you're really painting a great picture.
It's true. Well, yeah. I mean, let's talk about that because there's some myths around that. Because for example, a lot of times I hear guys teaching about passive income, right? I found out they're telling people how to flip properties, which is definitely not a passive investment. That's an active business. Or doing wholesaling, which is you become like the broker, so to speak, on real estate transactions. Both of those strategies are a part-time to full-time business, not passive at all. And even most people, when they rent properties, like you mentioned, California, I have one client actually in California in San Diego that he's had a rental property. It was his first home. He's now been renting it out. And he had such a hard time getting rid of it. The problem is had $700,000 of equity, but his net cash flow was $200 a month. That means he's making a 0.3% return on his equity, right? We call that return on equity. I told him, it's like, listen, we can take that 700,000 out. We can actually, either we can put it into properties or we can even put it into a fund, right? We can even move it somewhere else, put that money there and make even at least a 10% rate of return. That's 70,000 a year versus your 2,400 a year. It's just, how do we use it? And so he finally kind of came around to the idea. It took him a few years because he was very slow to act. But because he was emotionally attached to that property, which is the biggest thing. So yes, you're right. Anything on the western half of the United States stinks for real estate. On the southeast to Midwest, there's a lot better opportunities. So there's a few things you can do. One, and I would call this semi-passive, is you can do what's called turnkey rentals, right? Where a turnkey company, they actually help you find the properties. They find them. They help you find the renters. They even help you get the financing if you have to get through a bank or whatever it might be. They help you set it all up. And the numbers going in up front. So how much money you're going to make before you buy the property. That to me, that's now you're not managing the property, which is great. I hate managing properties, don't like it. I would call it semi-passive because you still have to manage the property managers. And if you don't have a good property manager, your life stinks, right? If you have a great one, like I have a property manager in North Carolina, I never hear from, other than paychecks. I like that, I like where there's no drama, same renters. It's perfect. Even Memphis, Tennessee, I have a property there. It's very similar. Alabama, not so much. And so we're selling those properties now, taking the equity out and moving it somewhere else. But you don't have to just do that. There's ways to invest in real estate where you can lend your money to the real estate investors, let them do the investment. You get paid a fixed return. So like I've got friends that pay like 10, 11, 12% a year on that money that you give them. So they go in, they do their own active investing. You're purely passive on that end. You could have part ownership in things like self-storage units or apartment buildings or commercial buildings and things like that. Different times, different markets will have different strategies that are preferred, right? But you can do those things. Oil and gas is another one outside of real estate. You can actually get paid on the lease on the land, like it's real estate, but also get paid on the mineral rights from the drilling, even the natural gas, which is a green energy that you get from that. So, franchises, there's so many options you can do. I had one guy in California that he took $1 million from his retirement plan that his financial advisor says, here's 30,000 a year you can live on. He took that same $1 million, bought a few duplexes that were managed by somebody else, invested in a few apartment buildings as part owner, but not managing it or anything. And then did some oil and gas. And now his 30,000 a year has now turned into 130,000 a year from that same $1 million.
Minus the taxes he had to pay taking it out of his.
Yeah. And he's going to pay taxes anyways, but now he's got some of those, like the oil and gas has some tax advantage. So and some of the real estate has some tax advantages too. So he's paying less in tax on that same money coming out anyways.
I remember my dad saying to me, he goes, boy, I wouldn't want to be a young person now. This was like 30, 40 years ago. He said this to me because it's so much harder than when I was that age. And I think it's even more challenging than it was when I was that age. I just agree. There's so much, because there's so much more information and so many people in the game that you have to really use a little bit of luck and a lot of strategies and that's not passive, because it's passive in maybe the day-to-day. I'm not painting the inside of an apartment right now, but I'm trying to find one, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm weighing the upsides and the downsides. And then there's the idea of let's just talk. Can we talk real estate for a minute?
Let's go for it.
Okay. Single family homes, Section 8 housing, apartment buildings. I guess people have their own sort of idea of what works. Right now, a lot of on the real estate podcasts, they talk about, multifamily homes as the way to go. Can you even pay your mortgage with what you're going to get in the rent? Certainly not in California, not where I live.
There's definitely different markets, right? I mean, there's different times for things. Like, for example, apartments, they have been hot. Here's one thing you got to be aware of too. If you ever hear the general media or the general public talking about a certain investment, that's the time never to do that investment.
It's too late.
Like, remember a few years ago, everybody was raving about Bitcoin. And everybody's like, oh my goodness. And even people that didn't have any business in this, didn't know anything about investing or wanted to buy Bitcoin. Whenever I hear that, whenever I hear like ex-classmates that don't know anything about money, posting on Facebook, hey, how do I buy a Bitcoin? That's when it's the wrong time to buy a Bitcoin, right? Same thing with the stock market. Like, when nobody's worried about the stock market, that's when I get worried, and I'm very worried. In fact, the fact that it went up more concerns me even more about how big of a bubble burst is going to happen in the stock market soon. Real estate, the thing is, people have always hated real estate. Even when it was hot, there's certain circles, they'll say they love it because they're doing real estate, but the general public still fears real estate from the last recession because that recency bias, right? Yeah. Even though that was the only recession in the last 6 recessions where real estate went down, but that's what people remember. And so they're still scared of real estate or certain types. But apartment investing, that was one that got really hot, especially up to a few years ago. That was one that I started telling people, be careful. And now we're starting to see that happen. Doesn't mean that you can't buy apartments, but even my friends that have been around the block. And by the way, so one of the reasons that people hire us, because we have a lot of vetted opportunities. When we vet some of our people, I look for track record. Specifically, did they get their teeth kicked in the last market cycle, right? The last recession. Even if they didn't get their teeth kicked in, maybe they just learned some good things and they still came out just fine. That knowing that they've been through a full market cycle, they've gained that wisdom is very important. Because you mentioned this earlier, like, it seemed like anybody can make money in real estate, like 2018. So when someone says, oh, I've been doing real estate since 2018, I say, well, great, keep going. But I ain't putting a dime with you because, you haven't really been through, you haven't had the battle scars yet, right? You haven't had those war wounds from markets shifting and changing to really know how to adjust and pivot. And we're seeing that today. I've seen a lot of people stop paying out their investors, even good investors, that are like, woof, I got to stop paying for a few quarters just so we can get some profit back up and then we'll pay again. That can be normal even in a challenging market. But the ones that are really bad are the ones that don't know what to do. And they're wondering if they're going to lose everybody's money, so you do have to be very careful, but there are still plenty of opportunities. Like I said, I like to lend money instead of just putting money in like an apartment space. Apartments are pretty much not in right now. Doesn't mean I won't be in later. Just means that it's been too hot. And that this is not the timing or the right part of the cycle for apartments. But self-storage, that's one that's kind of coming back up on the rise. It kind of hit a low in 2021, 2022. Now it's started to try to come back up again. That's another one that potential there. Oil and gas, I think with the gas prices right now as low as they are and they predicted to go much higher, I think it's a great time to have benefits there. Even rentals, I'm more picky about it, but there are certain rentals, even if I may not leverage any debt, I might not use a mortgage on them, I might do rentals that way. So there's still plenty of opportunities to invest, but you do need to be more careful. And that's why you need to have, either good education and or a good community around you to support you.
Great answer. Let's talk about your company, how people can get a hold of you and your podcast. So if folks, you want to contact Chris, you can do that.
Yeah, my company's Money Ripples, as I mentioned before. You can find information on moneyripples.com. Our podcast is called the Money Ripples Podcast. You can find that on any channel, with Apple Podcasts or YouTube or anything else too.
Okay, so there you go. Money Ripples and you'll find Chris and probably visit the website, and you can see all the things that he offers to clients. And if you like what he's talking about, which I do, I think that there's a lot of great things that could help a lot of people, which I appreciate when I have guests that are actually interested in helping other people as much as they are themselves. So that's really been a pleasure talking to you. I could do this for like 6 more hours because it's such a fascinating topic to me, but we're not going to do that. We're going to move on with our day and enjoy the rest of our day, because that's what it's about. What do you need money for if you're not going to enjoy your day?
Amen.
Amen. And we'll go with amen. All right, Chris, have a fantastic day. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Bob.
Much appreciation for you folks listening to The Exploding Human. The website is theexplodinghuman.com. The YouTube channel is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. I want to thank Chris Miles one more time for being on the show. I really enjoy this topic. We're going to be doing a part 2 of this interview, and we're going to be talking about money and relationships. Kind of the number one cause of why couples fight is money. Did you know that? Of course you did. Everyone knows that. But we're going to be talking about some of the solutions, how he works with people to get them on the same page. That's coming up in the next episode. But in the meantime, have a fantastic day. Thank you.